the government, and it's about the reforms and about the other things. The moderator will be George Logush. The speakers will be Leszek Balcerowicz, former Deputy Minister, Prime Minister, Minister of Finance of Poland, Dmytro, Shymkiv, Deputy Head of Administration of the President of Ukraine, Mr. Abromavicius, Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine, Artem, Myrhorodsky, Head of the Reanimation Package of Reform, Secretariat, Lyubov Akulenko, Coordinator of the program, and also Pavlo Kuchta, and Dmytro, Solohub, Deputy Head of the National Bank, Viktoriya, and also there will be the opening speech made by Roland Freudenstein, Deputy Director and Head of Research and the Wilfried Martens Center. Please let us start, dear colleagues. Please turn off your mobile phones.
Dziękuję bardzo. Ja będę po polsku mówił. Jest to z ogromną satysfakcją, że ja tutaj powiem kilka słów na temat naszego projektu Ukraine Reforms. Martens Center jest think tankiem, jest instytutem badawczym Europejskiej Partii Obywatelskiej, czyli European People's Party, które jest największą rodziną partii w Unii Europejskiej i największą grupą w Parlamencie Europejskim. Więc nasz prezydent tego think tanku jest Mikuláš Dzurinda, były premier i potem minister spraw zagranicznych Słowacji, wielki reformator, który właśnie jak półtora roku temu przejął prezydencję Martens Center, miał ten pomysł, że my przygotowujemy specyficzny program dla Ukrainy. I to właśnie nie jest doradztwo w tradycyjnym sensie, ale to jest raczej taki program, w ramach którego my przygotowujemy dwudniowe pobyty albo programy dla reformatorów ze środkowej Europy z lat 90. i 2000. Czyli ludzi, którzy mają jeden message dla narodu ukraińskiego. Myśmy to zrobili, wy również możecie to zrobić. I jest światło na końcu tunelu. Jest nadzieja. To wszystko jest możliwe. I z tą wiarygodnością specyficzną reformatorów ze środkowej Europy my z Brukseli i z naszymi partnerami tutaj w Kyiv School of Economics i Reanimation Package of Reforms, my chcemy właśnie wkładać naszą kontrybucję do reformy w Ukrainie i do sukcesu tej modernizacji waszego kraju. Dziękuję bardzo za uwagę.
Panie Roland, dziękuję wam. My będziemy prowadzić.
Thank you. We'll be speaking today in Ukrainian, Polish and Russian, and this way someone will understand something, not in Lithuanian. Well, you will try in Lithuanian. The reason being because this program goes to the masses of population, and I believe it's very interesting, and people are concerned, and people are interested in how reforms will look like, which reforms in which order, how coordinated, what will be the use of that for people, because reforms for the sake of reforms, that is not the reason. How will Ukraine look after reforms, and how will the life of people look like? Will we be able by these reforms to grow economy so that in some years we can say that we will be richer 3 times as Polish compared to Ukrainians. The per capita in Poland, per capita income in Poland is 3 times higher than in Poland. We started from the same conditions. How to do this? How to communicate with you? And in communication with you, we will get the feedback and we will understand that maybe we need to do something differently in a different order. So starting this discussion, we need to start quite efficiently because people will start switching TV programs. So Mr. Balcerowicz, your welcoming remarks.
Скільки забажаєте?
Oczywiście po polsku, ale też mogę mówić po rosyjsku. Więc po polsku czy po rosyjsku? Po polsku, świetnie. Tak, Roland świetnie mówi po polsku, chociaż jest z Niemiec, no więc ja też będę mówił po polsku. Proszę Państwa, jest ogromne doświadczenie innych krajów, nie tylko Polski, jest z Estonii, innych krajów tego regionu. Jest doświadczenie Słowacji i prawie żaden problem, przed którymi stoi. Tak. Хорошо, тогда я начну с самого начала.
Then I will start from the very beginning. We don't have the Polish interpreter. In Russian, for example, I said that there is a big experience of such countries as Poland, not just Poland, but the countries of Baltics, Slovakia, almost all the problems which you are facing, which existed in your country before, and they were overcome, with the exception of aggression and stabilization of reforms. But the war, you know, is not an argument not to conduct reforms, but to make them faster. So there is an experience. And for example, for the first time in Poland, there were big subsidies for electricity, and they were removed because we knew that, first of all, it is important to stabilize the budget, and secondly, they were not just because if there are low prices for everyone, then who gets more? The rich people who have palaces, that's not fair, it's not efficient, and we were doing in the past what you are doing now, and that's correct, to save the economy and for the growth of economy and for the justice to reduce the subsidies for poor people, but so that people have some protection, so that the subsidies should be only for poor people, not for everyone. From the intellectual point of view, this is quite clear what needs to be done in this situation. First of all, the diagnosis. What are the problems? The more there are problems, the better. Why? Because then if there is a correct package of reforms, then you can learn. We shouldn't be saying we have so many problems, but how can these problems be addressed? If there are correct solutions, then we can improve that. And that was the case in Poland and in other countries. Our situation was very dramatic. In 1989, the production was going down. We had hyperinflation. We had a very big debt. We were bankrupt. But at the same time, we saw what needs to be done approximately, and we were trying to do that. So the first thing is diagnosis, and based on the diagnosis and based on some other knowledge, we had to define where are we trying to get to which system. For a poor country like Poland, like Ukraine, the most important thing is quick long-term growth. Nothing can be more important than big and fast growth. It is important. Without that, there will be no increase in the standard of life. If there is economic growth, the standards of life will go up, and also jobs. The best social policy is the policy thanks to which the private entrepreneurs can create more jobs for people, not bureaucracy. Creating bureaucracy is bad policy, and you need to see what is to be done so that they can create more jobs, especially small and medium-sized enterprises. But we know that in your situation it is very important to have economic growth, because the national defense is financed by that. It is important. The position of the country depends on economic dynamic, on economic growth, why the position of Poland went up during these 25 years. We were surprised looking at Germans. They were saying that the Polish economy is just like a chaos. But the Germans shouldn't be saying that. You see, you can change the public opinion. And the third is immigration. If the country is poor, then many people immigrate from that country, and only quick economic growth can gradually delay this immigration. We know a lot. We know what system can create, can lead to fast economic growth. There's a lot of experience, a lot of research, but that should be known. I will tell it. All the companies should be private companies. Maybe there could be some deviations, but only as an exception, because that is socialism, which went bankrupt, and that is why privatization is the best social policy, because losses will disappear, and in certain cases there should be development of the companies, private companies. Then competition. Without the competition, private companies, even operating well, but without the competition it will not succeed. If there's no competition, then the monopolies are created. In the beginning of the 90s, we started doing it, and also the external liberalization that was done in 1990. That's probably unpleasant for some enterprises which want to hold monopoly positions. They were complaining in our country. They were saying we'll go bankrupt, but it did not happen. Thanks to liberalization, demonopolization, the export grew up the first year by 30%, and also stability of good laws. The stability of good laws. And for that we need to follow the politicians. You have a very strong civil society you have to follow. The laws are good, the laws are not bad, they produce that. Secondly, stability of macroeconomics. Stable budget is one of the prerequisites for the sound growth. And what has been done by the IMF confirms that Ukraine managed to reduce the budget deficit. And that is a big achievement, especially of the Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Finance, Jareska. That's great achievement of her, and she, knowing Western countries, Western creditors, she's doing a lot for Ukraine to achieve what Poland has achieved, the reduction of debt. Why have we achieved the reduction of debt? Not because we sacrificed communism. No, that's not enough. The victims do not get any privileges. Those who are reforming and those who show that they want and they can help themselves, then they get something. So I believe that the West should do more for Ukraine, but if Ukraine wants to stimulate, then Ukraine has to show that it goes for the reforms which are needed for Ukraine itself. It's not for the West, it's for Ukraine itself. And stability of macroeconomy. Hryvnia got stronger. I know it was weak and then it got stronger. Why? the situation is getting stabilized with the budget and communications. In communications, you have to show that sometimes the unpleasant steps lead to pleasant steps. Don't complain all the time. And the third thing is transition. Diagnosis first. Second, the concept of the target-oriented system, because the system will lead to long-term growth. But the transition depends on the problems. If there are few problems, then you can do it slowly. If there are many problems, then you have to do it quickly and in wide front. I never use this term shocking therapy because people are afraid of the shock. Shock therapy is stupidity. That's radical and complex approach. It could be compared to the treatment therapy. If there are many problems, what's better? To wait, do it slowly, or do it fast and extensive. For people, it's much better when the transition is fast, not in sequence, but quick and wide. The main steps are to be made simultaneously, and the transition needs it. You need to know where are you going to. The concept is very important here, and there's no need to discover America. The America has been discovered. You have to look at it attentively. Also, secondly, coordination is very important, not just intellectual knowledge, but practical knowledge, coordination, managerial coordination, leadership, very clear plan as the basis of action of the team and the basis for communication, so that you can communicate why, how can this be done. So I would like to finish. If there is an opportunity, I will answer questions and I will ask, reply to comments. But I believe on the one hand you have problems, on the other hand you have big opportunities. You can surprise yourselves, just like Poland surprised its neighbors and itself as well. Thank you for attention. Thank you so much. It's interesting, you know, that we've heard from the person who was inspiring and who was leading the reforms in Poland. We have also the Minister Abromavicius here, the Minister of Economic Development. We have Dmytro Shymkiv from the Presidential Administration, and Dmytro Solohub, who is from the National Bank of Ukraine. I would request everyone to say a few words on how reforms are going on, what are the prospects for the population, where's this light in the end of the tunnel, whether this is really the darkest night before the dawn. Mr. Aivaras. Thank you. It's very interesting to listen to Mr. Balcerowicz. We met in the morning and I agree with his approach. And it's a pity that in our country we still cannot in such a quick rate to achieve these objectives, these goals. And there are several reasons why this is done slowly, but I wouldn't focus on that. I'm absolute optimist that it could be done. And as Leszek said, if everything's bad, then there is an upside which is quite big. The topic of today's discussion is coordination, sequencing and communication shows where we have problems. First is coordination. I've gotten information that out of the laws, drafts that the Cabinet of Ministers for months, for years, has been approving in different ministries and other central authorities. Out of all who submitted to the Verkhovna Rada, only 44 were approved. there is certain discoordination between the parliament and the cabinet of ministers. Ivan Miklos, my main advisor on economic policy, said when in Slovakia they were making reform, 99% of such drafts were submitted to the parliament by the cabinet of ministers, were approved. It says that there's not understanding of how difficult the situation is, or there is too much democracy, I don't know, but we need to run faster, because typical wording is that we need this draft law. It's a very draft, but it's still not final. You submitted it to the wrong committee. You did not include it into the agenda. We didn't have time to vote. And the members of parliament, for them it's also very difficult. I looked at the statistical information. 530 drafts were submitted to the Verkhovna Rada in the first 3 weeks. So they are overloaded by drafts, just like the cabinet of ministers. I've mentioned many times, last year the Ministry of Economy 2,300 plus documents had, and today instead of going to the governmental committee where there were 53 items on the agenda, I came here. You have to simplify those. In the cabinet of ministers there are 700 people. The Prime Minister said that he knows what 50 people are doing, but he doesn't understand what other 650 are doing. So you have to simplify the system, then only you will understand what we are doing. I introduced into the Cabinet of Ministers agenda a regulation, the amendment. I do not understand when you are considering 53-ish items, what is important, what is not. You have to differentiate. If these are reforms, then war, conflict, then defense, and the third is the rest. But till now it's all together, and it's difficult to understand. The same, we were talking with the MPs from the group of Europe. We were saying that someone from the Cabinet of Ministers should come in the beginning of the plenary session and explain to the document, this is the package of documents which are needed for the reforms in the country. And we still lack coordination and communication. And here there is a reason why there is this problem. Talking about the sequencing, I agree with Leszek Balcerowicz. Many times with the Minister of Finance we were explaining when your industrial production goes down for 36 months, then you have minus 17.6 the decrease of the GDP. The first thing you have to do is fiscal consolidation and macroeconomic stabilization. And that is what the government was doing during the first 3 months to receive the money from the West to stabilize the banking system. 50 banks went bankrupt out of 180. The exchange rate has to be stabilized only after that. Implementing reforms in parallel, we can expect that in 2016 we'll get some growth, and we will achieve that, definitely. I'm sure that the worst macroeconomic indicators are in the past, if the situation in the front does not deteriorate. And one more thing I will tell, what do we lack? In communication, it is very important to have everyone on one page. The President, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance should be telling one and the same story. Because it is important that during the war conflict, everyone is together. We do have coalition of 5 parties. Sometimes there might be 8 parties in the coalition, but it looks like some members of the coalition do not understand where the country is moving to in economic direction. We'll explain that. We believe that there are many documents already written, coalition agreement, IMF memorandum, Action Plan 2015, plan of restoration of Ukraine by Groisman program 2020, but still we have to explain in Lithuania and Latvia it took 20 years for those who were in power so that they win next elections. But irrespective whether these were conservatives or social democrats, everyone knew that they are all moving in the same direction to Europe. In the present parliament there are populists, unfortunately, who are promoting the principles of protectionism, non-privatization, non-demonopolization, and the strategy that I'm developing together with the leading economists of Ukraine and Ivan Miklos. We will present it till the end of June. We want to define the principles for the country, like the free economy, decentralization, deregulation, demonopolization, other things, so that once and forever we know, and all other initiatives of the government and the parliament which will be passed, so that all of them are based on these principles. Everything else should be put aside so that the reforms go on. So thank you, the Minister. This is very clear explanation of the strategy and the steps needed to achieve reforms, to implement reforms. Now I would like to ask Mr. Shymkiv to say how does it look. I will be speaking Ukrainian because I don't speak Polish well. I would like to welcome Professor. We talked a lot with the President. I like two clear positions that were expressed by Leszek, cutting down the budget, the state budget. If the country cannot live within the budget, it has to cut down the budget, and the pension age. Both topics are quite controversial in the Ukrainian society, but these were two key things from which Polish reform started. As to what's happening in Ukraine, I will very briefly say that coordination. For that, the National Council of Reforms was set up as a platform on which we are presenting, approving both the vision and plans of the reforms that stimulates the teams which are working on reforms to formulate the plans, to structure their understanding and develop the clear action plan. There are not plans everywhere, there are not responsible people everywhere, and there's no understanding everywhere that the plan is to be implemented. The plan is to be implemented. If we decided that we are making certain steps, that we work, that we approve some legislation, the law or the regulation will not reform everything. We have some laws, we can cancel them, or we can introduce control. One of the problems in Ukraine is accountability. And sometimes this could be done without laws and regulations. We do have all strategic documents that we need. Aivaras mentioned them. I don't, with the exception of the clarification document that Aivaras mentioned, and that is defining fundamental principles of economy that we are building. Are we building social type of economy or liberal type of economy? Because now we are trying to do both. And many of our decisions, they are based on populism, and we understand to implement all populist decisions, we have to do that. But if we don't have small and medium-sized business, where do we get money for all these wonderful promises that we, all these wonderful things that we promise? So one of the important things is accountability and responsibility, communication. My example, when I started working on reforms, I decided in the UCMC to do briefings. I was doing it every week. People were interested in reforms, but each week there were fewer and fewer journalists, fewer and fewer and fewer, and it's not interesting. And when the reform is done, then you implement some reform, you convince the MPs, the politicians, and then it just works. It's not interesting. We need to do it so that it's interesting. We have a big progress in many reforms, but people do not know. It's not interesting. There's no scandal. Many things which were made by Aivaras, it's just 2 pages of text, but it's not interesting for journalists. The President, the Prime Minister, at the National Council of Reforms appealed to mass media so that there are programs not of discussion nature, but of contextual nature. What is reform without populism? And again, I will start to renew my communication on what's happening in each one of the reforms. We now have the project office, we will have facts, and we'll be showing where things are happening. We have touched upon the topic of execution, and I believe that the execution of coalition agreement, we need to monitor the execution of coalition agreement. I know that Lyubov Akulenko will mention how the association is being executed. When we look at the system of monitoring that we introduced for all the reforms, that's the instrument which allows to clarify where every reform is hampering, is slowing down. In the ministries, when they saw that the system of indicators includes not just specific ministry, but the parliament, different structures, attitude of the society, when we understand what the problem is, that gives the instrument to those who are responsible for reforms to push the reform, and will have to push the reform, will have to fight for reform. This gives the instrument to the donors to help in a specific issue which hasn't been done. We have the clear understanding of all the indicators. We will calculate the indicators for 7 more, and this gives us understanding where the reforms are. For most of the reforms, we have not developed the indicators because you need to have an action plan first, but if we theoretically talk about that, then it is very difficult to follow the changes. I know that Dmytro will be talking about that, but the example of the National Bank, the clear plan, there's a clear action plan, the Ministry of Economy, there are reforms which go very well. But again, the issue of communication, I understand that. And again, I would like to emphasize, and I will ask the question to Professor Balcerowicz, how did the structure of the government and the parliament look like from the point of view of the majority in the government and in the parliament for decision making when you were implementing reforms? And how much time did you spend continuing the topic of Aivaras? What was the percentage of to what extent the government understood it, or the parliament, or the parliament the government? You as a communicator of reforms, you are very effective. The people want to hear that, but when journalists are not coming here, that's the problem of their attitude. The people want to know. You have to communicate to people. Please communicate. Mr. Professor, please answer the question. We had in Poland two stages of reforms. Most people remember only the first one, this heroic, romantic, 89, end of 91. Then I was responsible for economic reforms and for stabilization. And when the government of Mazowiecki was created, that was in September, we had real disaster. We had a team that I put together Then some other people joined us, and we were implementing the policy, we were developing the policy, working on the program. Parliament had 2 weeks to approve all the package of 11 laws, but they worked in parallel, not consequently. And we worked with them so that they know approximately what they will approve, and they approved almost all. But that was the state of emergency. Maybe the mostly interesting period for Ukraine is the second period between 1997 and 2000. I was then the Vice Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance. I was leading the Liberal Party Unia Svobody, and we were in coalition. We were within the coalition that was created around the trade union Solidarność. But that wasn't typical trade union. They had good ideas, but there were many other parties there, and I was responsible for the reforms of stabilization, and there were no any emergency situation. There was euphoria after liberalization. So, but this lasted longer, for several weeks, for several months, I mean passing of laws. And it was very important to coordinate. I was coordinating the economic policy and communications. The communications were mostly more important than in the first stage. In the beginning, we had a disaster where every country there was an order, go fast. The second period, communication was very important. With in any reform, there are opponents. Once there are no opponents, that means there are no reforms. You need to know from the very beginning what will be the opponents to clarify. And from time to time, if there is an attack, you need to be faster. You need to be faster. I will give you an example. We have medical personnel who wanted to get more money from the budget, but we had to stabilize the budget, and then we wrote a book, the book on losing money by where the billions are spent, and we wrote it and we presented it to the public, and they were in defensive. I had very talented young people who were responsible for communications. It is important. Communication is more important for reforms than for anti-reforms. Anti-reforms, they have natural motivations, and communications, bad emotions, populism. But to win, for that, you need to have a program of reforms and the program for communication. And I believe you have the combination of the first period in Poland with the second period. You have a state of emergency because of the aggression from Russia, and you also have the policy, which is not, and you have to use this emergency element for consolidation, for reforms, to speed up. And one more thing I would like to say, why the decrease of production, because Putin did shock therapy for you. Shock therapy means the fall of export of Ukraine to Russia. And if there is such a shock, which does not depend on Ukraine, in any country there would be the fall of production, because you had 30% of export to Russia, approximately. Now it's less, but no country can avoid the decrease of production with such a shock. In Poland, when in 91 we believed we will go up, but then Comecom fell, what was it? These were organizations of the socialist countries under the leadership of the Soviet Union. It was good that it fell. For the short term, it was bad because all relations got were stopped, and that was like a shock therapy, but it is unavoidable. It doesn't depend on you, but then there is a restructuring going on. If you look at export to the West, it is going up. It cannot go up as fast as the export to Russia goes down, but it goes up. And if reforms continue, you will have better structure of economy. Thank you, Professor. The economy means economy of time. And please, Dmitry, just shorter tell us what is the National Bank doing and what can Professor Balcerowicz advise you about. I will step aside from the logic of coordination, sequencing, communication. I will use the logic of Professor Balcerowicz that any strategy, any reforms have three stages. Diagnosis, where are we going? The second stage is what are we doing? And the third is where are we going? I'll start from the first one and then I'll go to the third and finish by the second. As to the diagnosis, as it has been mentioned already, we do have many problems, and I can say that all the devils came up together. That was the storm when all the disbalances in the country. You need to understand what's happening now, fighting with the crisis in 2014 or fighting with the occupation of Donbass. It's the fighting with all the accumulated disbalances for the last 24 years. What's happening in banking sector, in the sector of state companies, it's what's happening in the previous years. But last year, the trade war with Russia started when the share of export from 30 fell down to 17 this year. They fell down to 10, plus the prices went down in the global markets. There are many problems and they are to be addressed. We need to understand there's no way back to the past. The model of economy of Ukraine that worked till 2013, it cannot be resurrected. It's like the Soviet Union. You can believe that you can resurrect it, but this will never happen. It is like going back to the economy of Ukraine like it was is impossible. Now, where are we going? Looking at the experience of the National Bank, what is the vision of the future? Dmitry mentioned that there is a reform of the financial sector, and we have described all these stages. The National Bank has the main function, which is the price stability. It's in the law mentioned the stability of the monetary unit, but if we use correctly the international experience, that will mean the pricing stability is the basis of macro stability. The second one is stability of the banking system, or financial stability. And in fact, our vision of the future is based on efficient implementation by the National Bank of two main objectives. If we are talking about price stability, here again, we have a discussion. We don't have a discussion at the National Bank about that, on what exchange rate we need, because the countries, what regime do we need? There are countries which have the floating rate or the fixed rate. What we saw in the situation in Ukraine, that the fixed rate doesn't work. It was creating false stability. It was accumulating disbalances, and there is this model of the floating rate, the inflation. I will not tell that it's inflation targeting in 2016 and 2017 to go to the model of inflation targeting that Poland introduced in the end of the 90s. There's no sense doing it, but monetary policy is to be based on low inflation as the main objective, and for that the National Bank is to use all its monetary instruments. The financial markets are to be developed, banking sector. There should be very clear communication strategy. As to the financial sector, what I was talking about, the basis of the future, how we see the financial sector in the future, it shouldn't look like it's looking now. No crediting in banking sector, the very unstable structure of funding, dollarization, very unclear structure of ownership, all these banks, all these things. The National Bank said that it has zero tolerance to such things. And in fact, if now we move to the second stage, what is to be done? That is what the National Bank is doing, from my experience. And I have questions about that to Professor Balcerowicz. First thing you need to do, people who are implementing reforms have to understand it. From the experience of the National Bank, it wasn't like we need to fire everyone and hire new people and they will do it. It's more about key positions, about the internal structure of decision making. It was quite clear in the National Bank. From making decisions somewhere in the corridor, now everything is happening in the regime of formal committees. The Committee on Monetary Policy, on Assets and Liabilities, the Committee on Financial Stability, where there are clear procedures of internal decision making. And the same is true about the personnel. We always had qualified personnel, but the personnel was oriented to resolving different tasks. The situation in other authorities is not that great. What the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Economy are doing, they do a lot, but the public administration reform is the main one. And I would like to hear the opinion of Mr. Balcerowicz. How was it in Poland? Who was making the first stage of reforms? Old communist bureaucrats or young people who came to the ministries? And talking about reforms taking place now, there are stabilization measures taken. It's like cleaning these 49 banks. But at the same time, I wouldn't differentiate between what's happening now with the reforms and the future. You cannot separately implement reforms. You cannot separate your future reforms from what's happening now. The future is the continuation of today. Everything that's happening is in the IMF program, and it's not just like because IMF wants it, but because that was the position of the National Bank, that all these things related to transparency of the structure of the banks, the increase of capitalization of banking system, strengthening the role of macroprudential regulation. This is all in the IMF programs, and that is what is happening. Talking about capitalization, we had the first stage of the stress test. Now banks are being capitalized. Those which are not capitalized, they go to the fund of deposits guarantee. And also another thing which is difficult to explain, especially when what you have is so different from what you want to have. The words stable inflation sound strange in Ukraine when inflation in Ukraine is so big. You need to understand, and the Polish experience and the experience of other countries shows that if you do everything correctly, stabilization comes soon. But if instead of implementing painful measures, you are involved in social populism, you will get nowhere. And that is what the sense of communication is about. I will give you an example related to inflation. Yes, inflation is 60%. That was related to devaluation, increase of the prices for gas for the population, but we see that gradually the prices for other products, if they do not go down, they are stable. The economy is in recession. The internal demand is very low. If the situation is stable, if fiscal monetary policy are directed to support macroeconomic stability in 12 months, the inflation will be at the level of less than 20%. I believe that we see that in the end of the tunnel there will be light. Now the voice of people, Verkhovna Rada, Viktoriya, we are talking about legislation, about population, about public which elects the Verkhovna Rada. How should we communicate with people? Thank you for introducing me as the representative of people, because that's what I feel. I am the member of parliament who yesterday was not the member of parliament. I worked in business. I was not planning to go into politics and to work on the reforms from this side. I was trying to implement reforms from the other side. I was trying to identify three main problems why reforms are so slow and what we need to pay attention to. And for me, and this is also the issue of coordination. This is a big problem, the issue of coordination, because sometimes one stakeholder doesn't know what another stakeholder is doing. And in the parliament there were situations when we pass one law draft, we introduce amendments to one law, and in 2 weeks and 3 weeks, when the law is not even signed by the president, it's still at the president's office, another stakeholder introduces amendments into the norm that has been approved recently. And I believe that people, members of parliament, and our foreign partners, they are shocked because of that, because we do not demonstrate any stability. We do not show that changing some norm, changing the approach, we do not even give the chance to try how it will work in practice. That is first problem. The second problem, what we need to pay attention to is attracting professionals from a specific sphere to writing the concept, and when the concept then is turned into drafts. We need to understand that it's not just about legislation that we adopt, but it's about implementation. Let's, at the stage of forming the concept, involve the professionals who will be implementing these norms. Because if now we approve the norms which will be impossible to implement, or which will have some gaps, or which will have some corruption risks, which some people will be able to use, then I believe we will not achieve the objective that we have. Thank God, we see that professionals, practitioners are involved into some legislative drafting processes, but I would expand it and I would attract them to all the spheres of legislative drafting. And the third thing is action plan that we need to have. We have coalition agreement, we have the action plan for the government, the strategy of the President 2020, but I believe in order to move together, we need one action plan with clear deadlines to understand what we are doing and why, what do we want to achieve in the end. And here I would like to mention one thing, talking about the economy. I'm sure that in every country the key role in the development of economy is played by the competition agency of the country. And Mr. Balcerowicz, I was in Poland, I met Anna Fernalczyk, your colleague. She's former head of anti-monopoly office of Poland. And we were trying to understand what in our anti-monopoly committee is wrong, what we need to change. And when I was telling Anna about what our anti-monopoly committee was doing all these years, she was shocked. She was shocked because our anti-monopoly committee was always involved not in monopoly structures, but it was involved, it was working on small business and medium-sized business. And when you give such examples that for distortion of the results of the tender, when the Anti-Monopoly Committee makes physical persons, entrepreneurs responsible, the question is, don't big holdings make such violations? And we raised many issues and advised us to change the structure of Anti-Monopoly Committee, because she said that the structure itself has a corruption component. I would like to request you to comment. When these reforms were taking place in Poland, what was the role of the anti-monopoly agency? How important was the role of this competition agency, and how did you manage to make this body independent from politicians, from authorities, from oligarchs, and how did you manage to do it so that your competition agency formulates its own policy, irrespective of any oligarchs? Thank you. Mr. Professor, maybe let's wait, now maybe let us wait for the word from the civil society. I will also have questions to Professor. The public always looks at what are the problems. In Ukraine, the year passed and we do not see any reforms. I would like to draw your attention to some reforms. Talking about coordination, we have wonderful ministers appointed, they have wonderful deputies, but I would draw your attention to the problem that all these people with great background, education and experience get very small salaries. We call them volunteers, and we're concerned how long will they last? How have you been addressing this problem? How were you hiring professionals, and where did you find salaries for them? We as you signed the association agreement. That agreement was key for you, and it was access for you to European markets. We don't have a vice prime minister on that, despite the fact that we don't have any coordination in these issues in the ministry. There are deputies on Euro integration, but our situation is worse than yours. Russia organized shock therapy for us. We have a trading representative in the Ministry of Economy, but that's not enough. It's not enough because we need to very quickly approve plenty of legislation on the free trade zone. We started doing it because the public insists. We work with the parliament. There are people in the parliament who understand that we need to overcome phytosanitary barriers for export of food products, technical barriers. We need to organize the work of the competition agency, of customs, but the other issue that Mr. Abromavicius mentioned, that in the Verkhovna Rada there is no critical mass of people who would understand that the legislation which refers to reforms in the association should go quickly. You know that you had this specific procedure, shortcut, who introduced it and how it worked. And last question. The basis for the economy is small and medium-sized business. You survived the crisis of 2008 because it was developed in your country. What's happening now? The biggest problem for small and medium-sized business is for them to go to the markets of European Union, they need access to money. We now learned that Ukraine is getting big technical assistance, big money from European Union via the Ministry of Finance, but actually business doesn't have access to that because the money that comes to the Ministry of Finance go to the banks, and banks give loans at high interest rates. How did you find cheap credits for your business? Maybe you will try to answer. These are very important questions. I have to talk on behalf of Poland. Of course, I cannot answer all your questions, but I will try to answer some of them briefly. In Poland, in the beginning, we could not replace thousands of civil servants, but key positions. If the ministers are good, if the ministers have freedom so that they can nominate their deputies and go down, then you can replace the administration, you can change the behavior of administration without mass changes. Good ministers who have freedom, that is important. That is what was in our country. We had ministers from Solidarność. These were good people. I had first 20 people, then 50 people, the team, yeah. And they were holding the main positions. The first week, I dismissed all the heads of taxation in the taxation system and all the regions. I wanted to cut off former contacts. Many new young people came there. We also had a problem of low salaries, and in the beginning we could not increase salaries, but many people who were working, they were working on enthusiasm, but I know that this shouldn't be happening in the future. What we were trying to do, we were cutting down the number of people and increase the salaries because of such savings. The number of people we were reducing, the salaries we were increasing. For us, from the very beginning in Poland, one of the main principles, the principle of competition. And as I have mentioned, we started massive demonopolization. All the monopolistic structures were, almost all of them were privatized. The post was there, and then massive liberalization, so that there is a competition from outside. Without that, there will be no real competition. I understand this is a shock, a trading shock, but that is out of the control. Maybe that's the price for consolidation in Ukraine. That is out of your control. And then it is important, all these transformations of economy, when you are moving towards the West has to do more on liberalization. I remember the agreement, if everyone ratifies the association agreement, then there will be liberalization of access for export from Ukraine to European Union. You need to observe countries who are late. You need to have allies in the European Union. Poland is your allies, but it is important for you to work with Germany. They will work with others. It is important to influence public opinion. You have great artists. I'm not joking. You need to create a team of artists, actors, to influence the public opinion of Germany. And then export. If export is open to the West, then you will have better structure in painful way, but this disease will give certain effect with delay, but it will produce an effect. In the very beginning, we knew that 10-time monopoly commission is very important. From the very beginning, they had a very strong position. They had this the certain time they had to work term, they had to work, and it is important to have good people. Anna Farnacek was in the first team and we managed to develop the tradition. The independent central bank was one of the fundamentals, and then the tradition is being created so that in most cases we managed to do that. Thank you. Mr. Myrhorodsky, maybe you will say something what you are concerned with, and you will ask a question. Thank you, Professor. For me, the graduate of the University of Economics, you were the icon of economic transformations, and we were studying what shock therapy is and what are real changes. I present the main public platform which is involved into developing of the drafts, and in 24 years of independence we have the biggest inclusiveness in the parliament, inclusiveness of public we participated in drafting of 44 drafts that were approved by the Verkhovna Rada, but we see the problem with implementation. We do not see the link between the approved drafts and the implementation of reforms in the executive authorities, in the ministries and agencies. We see that the ministries and Verkhovna Rada don't communicate enough. The public sector is involved, but we fail to do everything. We are now just starting work with the most progressive ministries, Ministry of Economy, Agricultural Complex, Ministry of Finance, but even there, they don't have many people who can communicate to public. The ministries are very often closed structures. They do not engage public opinion. Those who do engage, they are mostly progressive. I would like to ask you how, during your work, you were attracting experts who were not politicians, who were experts, who knew the theory and practice, and how they were working with the ministry of your government. How did you attract them? What were the forms of getting them involved? And I would like us to, again, to repeat Lyubov Akulenko's question. We now have very low salaries. Of our government officials receive $300 like now, then the implementation of reforms will last for dozens of years. You can get good managers at the level of the deputy minister and head of the department, but how have you been addressing the issue of financing the ministries and agencies in Poland? I will say we don't have much time left. We've heard the answer to the question about salaries, reducing the personnel and increasing the salaries, how public sector was involved into work. How have you involved the public sector into the work of ministries and the government? As far as I understand, one of the questions was, where did you get the specialists from? NGOs. From the very beginning, we did not have many NGOs. In terms of socialism, there were no many NGOs, only official organizations. The government was not developing the civil society. The civil society was developing itself. You have a very big, fast rate of development of civil society. It is important to have the civil society which is fighting for freedom, economic freedom, and for the state with the rule of law. But there are organizations that want the state to give more money. Where will you get money from? So in every country there is always some peaceful conflict between the populist part of the civil society and the civil society part. And this populist part, where the populist part is stronger, they have economic catastrophes or disasters like in Greece. They have democracy. young people should be doing it. And once you're talking about specialists, in '89 we had many specialists in bad sectors, how to buy. In socialism, the question was about how to buy, not how to sell. Marketing became fashionable then, but then we were creating a team. We had a special program of recruiters. We recruited foreigners, if possible of Polish origin, from the US, from Great Britain. You have many Ukrainians. In Toronto, 20%, I believe. So you do have potential, but it's not only there. And the banking supervision, there was no banking supervision. We did not need it in times of socialism, but then within this program, we invited a person from Great Britain who spoke Polish, and he helped us create banking supervision, and he was the first chairman in this supervisory committee, Berezov. 25 years ago, then in Poland, when Poland started developing, many foreigners started coming, and that was import of capital. Success leads to success. Thank you. We are following the reforms. Mr. Pavlo Kukhta is specializing in that, and it is important for the state and the population to understand what are the problems. Please say a few words. We have very little time left. Tell us about your work. I wanted to show 3 slides. This will not take a lot of time. Let's look at our index of reforms. We believe it could be from -5 to +5. -5 is degradation, not reforms. Plus is reforms. Higher than 2, it's acceptable rates of reforms. After IMF package, that was the highest point of our index, the reform started speeding up. That's split into 5 directions. The blue is the rate of reforms after the package, IMF package, the yellow before the package. That's to Abromavicius. We have good rate of reform on trade policy, regulatory policy, industrial organization. That's thanks to deregulation. And here there are 3 best and 3 worst performers. And the first one is increasing tariffs, according to our experts. And the third is the law on natural gas. But the worst is the state budget for 2015, which was adopted with violation of procedures, and it's not of high quality. Thank you. With this, thank you, Professor. We'll continue working, we'll continue inviting specialists, leaders of reforms from neighboring countries who were successful in reforms, where the population lives much better, and we'll develop that, and how we'll think about how to communicate that to you Ukrainians. Thank you.